Hey gang, Mass and Gail here. We're with a good friend of ours, Keith Jones, in the Midwest. Keith is a 38-year veteran of a large metropolitan law enforcement agency and the survivor of 5 lethal force encounters. Some of the lessons he's learned from those encounters. Keith, it's good to have you here tonight.
Mass, it's a pleasure to be here.
Can you give our listeners a little overview of those 5 fatal force incidents?
Well, they were all, I should say 4 of the 5 were when I was a patrol officer and in a metropolitan area here. And one was as a plainclothes car officer on a warrant service.
Keith, as I recall, one of those men had a knife, and the other 4 either were shooting at you or were bringing loaded guns to bear.
Yeah, the one fellow had a knife. The other 4 had handguns, and they either had fired shots or were bringing the gun to bear on me preparatory to shooting.
Now, as I understand, you won all 5 and were never wounded.
No, I was never wounded, not in any of those incidents.
You are best known nationally and in the Midwest for the training that you've brought to other officers and other instructors, and the insights that you've gathered, not just from your own experience, but the collective significant experience of your own department, and the research that you've done nationwide. Putting it all together, your own experiences, what you learned in your department, what you've learned researching nationwide and officers from other countries, give our listeners an overview of how you rate the relative importance of mindset, of training, of skill, and equipment.
Well, I've been lucky enough to be able to talk with policemen and with different agencies in the U.S. for, I'm sure 30 years now, formally and informally, about surviving lethal force encounters. And it's fair to say that, like any officer, I had an avid interest in learning to perfect the techniques that could keep people alive and to try to train officers to use the sort of tactics that would preclude any kind of gunplay, and if it presented itself, that they would be in a position to survive without injury. And as time went by, you would take the incidents and turn them over and think of, research each one and think about each one and try to see if there were any commonalities between them that you could reduce to the essence and make a rule to where you could use it as a teaching point, and that would be valid in a really simple way in every encounter. And we've come to that point to where we know that there's a triad of mindset, marksmanship, and tactics. When I say a triad, it's like a coffee table or a heavy-duty table that has 3 legs, and that you use that as a basis to build on. Mindset, marksmanship, and tactics. And we have done everything we can to perfect that to where we can teach that. So people, everyday people, I'm not talking about SWAT operators, I'm talking about everyday people, first responders who go out, and they're the people first on the scene who are likely to have to deal with sudden explosions of homicidal violence.
Keith, just speaking personally, the 5 times you've had to shoot down a man who was trying to kill you and sometimes brother officers, tell us what was going through your mind. Tell us how you coped with the fear, the realization that you were literally on the edge of death and looking down into the precipice.
Well, if a person, like, I hate to sound like a perennial instructor, but we go back to the color codes of awareness. And myself and all the officers gunfight survivors I've talked to, when people, you have the levels of awareness, the color-coded awareness of condition white, which was you're completely unaware, elevated to condition yellow, which is a heightened sense of awareness but still fairly relaxed, to condition orange, which you've perceived a threat and you dial in on it and you're assessing it, to condition red, where you take some sort of either evasive some sort of action where you use countervailing force. The times that I have, walked in on a scenario by myself or with other officers, and I was in condition yellow, and I was dialed in doing what I had been trained to do. I was fine. I don't recall any being overwhelmed by fear or panic. I just, as you would say, you default to the level of your training. It's like that old saying that they would say, when you don't know what to do, you'll do what you know how to do. And I just made it a point, the first encounter I was in, I got caught flat-footed. I was, in the old days we had to moonlight a lot, and I was just really wore out from a part-time job, and when I went to take a disturbance run about a loud stereo, and there was a guy who was smoking meth, and I knocked on the door, and he told me to open up the door, and I stepped in the doorway, and there he was, and he reached over and picked up a 20-gauge shotgun and swung it to bear on me, and it felt like somebody shoved me to the side, and I heard, I thought, good, another officer stepped into the hallway here and shoved me out of the way, and then I heard, some gunshots and saw the guy fall down, and then I thought, yay, my buddy shot him, I don't know what happened, and then I realized in the bottom of my vision I saw something moving, and I looked out and I could see the wide flat rib of the 38 service revolver, and it was coming up in my hand. I realized that I'd shot the guy. And that was like to talk about a watershed event. From that point forward, every time I went anywhere, still today, I'm condition yellow. I stay switched on, and I don't go into condition white until I get someplace away from the street or inside the police substation or at home or something like that. And like when we tell people about these simple basics like the color codes of awareness, and like controlling distance and cover and time, when we tell people about those basics and we pound them into people, we find that they always survive. There's no free lunch. It's not rocket science. We have good training. We have the capacity to give good training, not just where I work, but we have people such as yourself who give excellent training, realistic training. And if people do that, then when they're under stress, they'll default to the level of training.
Keith, picking up on what you just said, there was a period of time when your department became famous for a skill level such that the average shooting was being ended in 1.8 shots per officer. Can you tell us about that and what you think brought it to that level?
Well, this was in the mid-1970s, and, during your research, I know you contacted our agency, and other people within the federal and state government and local governments, different places, contacted us because I fielded calls from a lot of them. And about for a period of time from the mid to late 1970s into the early 1980s, we were averaging 1.8 shots expended per encounter. They wanted to know why, and we were using, in those days, 4-inch barrel service revolvers and 125 grain 357 Magnum ammunition.
Can you tell our listeners the brand and model of the gun and the brand of ammunition?
Well, we went through several. When we switched from 38s to 357s in 1975, we initially switched to a Smith & Wesson Model 65, which is a fixed-sight stainless steel bull barrel K-frame Magnum. We had those for a while. We switched to nickel-plated Model 19 4-inch 357s. Went from that to the L frames when they came out, and we kept the L frames until we transitioned to 9mm pistols about 1989 or 1990.
As I recall, your ammunition was primarily federal brand with occasionally on
we used the federal. We had real good luck with it. The primers in it, it was a really sure ignition. They were some of the first people who used the flash suppressed powder. And like out of a 4-inch gun, there used to be a problem with that huge ball of fire that would come out of the end when you'd fire a 357 Magnum. And to credit Federal Cartridge up in Anoka, Minnesota, they were the first people that started to use, I think, their potassium salts to suppress the flash and the powder. Yeah, and we used those, and like now we talk about, I don't want to get off on a tangent, but like I don't want to dwell on muzzle flash, because if we stand and shoot and in the darkness and you say, holy Pete, there's a ball of fire coming out of there. In all of the shootings we had, and every policeman I've ever talked to who used guns with a lot of muzzle flash, I've never heard of it being a problem in a civilian defense or police close range defense problem. Now, in a military context where you see somebody's muzzle flashes several hundred yards away and they give away their location, that's an issue. But usually, spitting distance gunfights, that muzzle flash wasn't a problem. If you can eliminate it, great, that's fine. But it wasn't much of a problem.
Yeah, Keith, tell us about the training regimen that allowed those men to end the fight so quickly with a hard-kicking, hard-to-control gun and deliver the very high hit ratio that they had under stress.
Well, you said that the 357 Magnum out of the K-frame and L-frame revolvers had a reputation of being, had a heavy recoil compared to the old 38s. And we started a training program, and we copied Oxnard, California, and some other departments in Southern California, because we learned that they were qualifying their officers every month. Where we, like most people, were shooting the old style PPC pistol revolver course, which was a 60-round qualification course. Our guys shot it twice a year, and that was sort of standard then, and we thought we were doing what everyone else did. And then after we learned about the agencies in Southern California, and that it was commented to us that their hit ratio had gone up, so we approached the administration there at my agency and asked them about that, and we decided to take the 120 rounds that we budgeted for each man per year. That is to say, enough rounds, we purchased enough practice ammo so that each guy could fire two 60-round courses of training fire, two 60-round courses twice a year, making a total of 120 rounds per man per year. And what we did is we took that 120 rounds and we had the guys come in 10 months out of the year and fire 12 rounds. And when you think about a 6-shot revolver, this was like role-playing, and then just a quick shooting incident where a guy would shoot 6 rounds and he would dump and reload, and we'd do some more training and he'd shoot 6 more and clean the gun and go back to work. And we noticed almost immediately that our guys started really connecting well, in spite of the weapon being, a fairly hard-kicking weapon. And the guys started to hit well, and they started to like when you hit somebody with a really powerful weapon like that, it's not always lethal, but it certainly changes the person's channel and makes them think about something other than attacking an officer or an innocent civilian.
I remember back in the 70s when your department was the first big agency to go to that particular load. Your lead firearms instructor told me what had initially surprised you guys was how many of the bad guys went down and were neutralized by non-fatal hits.
Precisely. We would have cases where an officer would be caught flat-footed unawares, and again, understand this was 30 years ago. We know a lot more about training and about maintaining awareness, but we weren't that astute back then. But anyway, we had cases where officers who caught flat-footed and in a panic yanked the gun out, rocked it up into a position they would fire and strike their attacker, say in the forearm, and it would totally that high-speed impact of the Magnum revolver would totally wreck the guy's forearm, and he would drop the gun and the fight was over. And a lot of people, I know, I learned back then that the issue is to survive the fight and prevail. And bring the guy in before a judge. Our job isn't to kill and arrest people, it's to incapacitate and arrest them. So the 357 Magnum, I think the previous 38 round we had was like a plus P flat nose 38. And if I recall right from the study we did, it was like we had 48% fatalities with that 38, which would oftentimes penetrate all the way through people. When we switched to the 125 357, the fatalities, the number of people we killed, dropped from 48% down to 23%. but we were whipping everybody. We were bringing them in, getting them fixed up, and standing them up in front of a judge to answer for what they'd done. Okay, too many people they look at lethality, they shot that guy twice, 4 times, and it didn't kill him. Well, we don't care if it killed him. We care that it put him out of the fight. Like our standard was, if our guys shoot the guy, was he able to return fire? Was he still in physical shape to return fire? And no, he just wasn't, because the guys were getting good hits with a powerful weapon. And as I say, we ran about 4 or 5 years expending 1.8 shots per encounter. Some encounters, mind you, were not true gunfights in the sense that like both sides were shooting. Sometimes our officer did as he was trained, took a good position, and when he would call on somebody to surrender, and when they would swing a gun to bear on him, he would fire first. There would be he would be the only person firing, and the threat was eliminated. We still call that an encounter. Now, in a classic sense, is it a gunfight? No, but it still worked out that it was an encounter, and our guys prevailed with very little shooting. And you don't realize it when it happens, but it turned out to be pretty impressive. And it's just a matter of using a powerful weapon and making the people get out and shoot. Jim Cirillo, the stakeout team in New York, they would fire every month. I've got a friend who retired not too long ago from Philly PD, Dominic Foligno. They had a robbery stakeout team. Dominic told me their guys had to fire twice a week. And if you fire as a citizen defensive shooter or a police officer, if you shoot often, every week or a couple times a month, then that, your gun handling skills, your marksmanship skills are solidified, and you're comfortable with them. And that frees up your mind for tactical decision making. Okay, because the mechanism. It's revolver, semi-auto pistol. You know how it runs. You shoot it a lot. It's not a stranger to you. It's not like I tell people. It's like a clarinet in your hands that you're trying to play. You haven't quite got the hang of it. It's something when you can tell when there's a stoppage. You can clear it. You can go right on. But you have to train frequently if you possibly can. And if someone, like when somebody comes by and says, "Hey, what caliber should I get? I want to get this really powerful caliber," or something like that. Everything's a compromise, and you have to decide that for yourself. But we tell people you've got to control it. You've got to be able to control the weapon before you can use it to control somebody else. Okay? And we would rather you have a moderately powerful weapon that we've researched and we know that it works well, than to have a weapon that you don't shoot often because you can't afford ammo, and it's hard to control. And it's not a magic talisman. It's a tool.
Keith, at that time, the late 1980s, you mentioned your department went to high-capacity 9mm.
Yes, sir.
And as I recall, they went to the 147 grain Subsonic. I know now you have high-capacity 40 caliber pistols. Can
Yes.
you tell us how that odyssey went and what you all learned from that?
Yeah. Well, we had we switched from the 357 Magnums to the 9mm load, and at that time, there was a lot of pressure from our administrators to adopt the 147 grain 9mm Subsonic, which was recommended by people in some of the federal agencies as being the premium ammo to use for law enforcement work, and we used that for a time, and we had trouble with it. Oftentimes it didn't expand. Like they would fire it into the ballistic gelatin and Gezo-Pete, it would just expand wonderfully. And then when we'd shoot it into a homicidal attacker's torso, it wouldn't expand. And then we went from firing like 1.8 shots to 4 or 5. And the other problem we had with it is, policemen step in behind people to handcuff them and tussle with them, and then there'll be a close quarters hurly-burly of a fight where sometimes the guy will pull a knife, or you'll see him reaching for a gun in his waistband that was concealed, and then you take one hand and shove him away, and then you're off balance and you yank your service automatic out and you'll fire. And remember, these pistols are recoil operated. and they depend on that gun recoiling against something solid. And when you're the firing platform at the time, and if your wrist isn't locked and your elbow isn't locked, or you're falling away or off balance, and you, as the firing platform, if you're not a stable platform for the weapon, the gun cycles as it comes back in recoil, and the subsonics, especially the one we had at the time, which we had the Federal 147, and it didn't have enough backwards oomph to always keep the gun cycling if an officer was off balance, or like in the wintertime when there would be like clothing, the open coats and long sleeves and padded jackets, and like as somebody was struggling, perhaps somebody's coat sleeve would drape over the slide of the weapon and impede it as it came backward in recoil and keep it from cycling correctly. So we were attempting to find some way to rectify that sluggish recoil problem, and it came through that the 40 caliber had come out, and we decided to start using it, and we traded up. We upgraded our caliber to the 40 caliber, and the 40 caliber, it just had enough more oomph to operate the same size service handgun, and those problems disappeared.
Well, Keith, what was the rationale for using subsonic ammunition in the first place?
Well, you have to remember, I've been around here since 1971. In the mid 1970s, there were folks, in different research groups. Some were with the U.S. government, some were not. I don't know if you remember that old 1975 Computer Man model where they had us shooting. They had shot into a computer man and decided that they had to have like a very shallow penetrating weapon.
The National Institute of Justice study on RII, Relative Incapacitation Index.
Well, that was that was made to us courtesy of the United States government. And what that resulted in was really light, really fast rounds that penetrated poorly. Mm-hmm. Like we had 38s, like 110 grain 38s and such.
So they just zip right through?
No, they would hit people. We would hit people in the chest. They didn't penetrate deep enough to hit vital organs. You're
talking about the subsonic stuff?
No.
Okay.
This was in 1975 when we had the shallow penetrating stuff.
Okay. And
then in 1986, at the Miami incident where the FBI had to, during an arrest involving a couple of really hyper-violent bank robbers, wound up having they were using this shallow penetrating 9mm ammo that was the darling of all the research people, the laboratory people, and it didn't penetrate well enough. Well, after that, the pendulum swung the other way, and the FBI recommended that we get this 147 grain 9mm because it penetrated deeply, because they believed that the problem with the scenario at Miami, they blamed everything on the failure of one of those shallow penetrating bullets, which was designed to penetrate in a very shallow way. So it was avant-garde to use these deep penetrating 147s, and they penetrated deeply, and as long as you hit something that was vital, then it worked. Okay, and but all too often in a fight, officers are lucky, defensive shooters, citizen defensive shooters, you're lucky to connect at all, and we just needed something that delivered a little more, it had to be a little more effective, and we had so many of us older officers at the time that remembered the wonderful performance we got out of the 357 Magnums, because they penetrated deep enough and adequately enough, and they carried enough striking energy that when we would if we had to shoot someone, the person knew they were hit, and it caused them, it caused them to gave them pause, I should say. Like maybe for a few seconds, most people when they were shot with that, they would turn away. Over the years, I've talked to a lot of people who have been involved in shootings, and I've researched a lot of shootings as mass. And it's just not really very often. I would want to say it's rare that anyone with a gunshot wound shows much interest in doing anything other than getting to an emergency room. We concentrate on the horror stories, the bad dreams, the bullet sponges, and we should work for that, because you do run into those guys periodically. But for the most part, most people, if you use good marksmanship and good tactical skills, and you've got the right fighting mindset, you can make something work, like a deep penetrating wound that doesn't impart much in the way of shock or effectiveness. Like you'll shoot somebody, they don't even notice it.
So they pretty much go in, but they don't really expand. Is that what you're saying?
You're talking about the 147. In the old days,
right.
They didn't expand. In fact, up until now, I know some of the ones like Winchester, the Ranger Talon, the research, the laboratory academics, they have touted it because in gelatin, the 10% ballistic gelatin, which they claim duplicates human tissue, it expands very well there. But they're finding that it doesn't always expand in people, and sometimes it's dependent on velocity. Like if you fired out of a barrel with a 4.9-inch, a Beretta, with a 4.9-inch barrel, it may do well because it's running close to like 990 feet per second. But when you put it in a 3.5-inch barrel compact gun, then you shoot somebody and it doesn't expand. Okay, and with the 40 caliber. There was a lot of research going into it through the 1990s. It was a bigger bullet. It had the design of the bullet. It allowed for a bigger, deeper hollow point cavity. And it was such that most of our officers, with a modicum of training, our everyday folks, not our SWAT operators, but our everyday folks, could pick it up and hit you in the upper chest with it, and that's what it took. And the 40 caliber, the various loads we've tried, they've all been pretty good. I've tracked down the guys with our agency and neighboring agencies that have used 40s. And if they watch the front sight, pull the trigger straight to the rear, hit the guy in the upper chest where they get through the top of the heart and the big pipes coming out of the top of the heart, they stop fights with a good hit or two. And when you reach a point where you can say that, and Mass can tell you the same thing, if you hit people, and within a good, one good hit or two, and they go out, folks, that's all you can expect out of a handgun. There's nothing magical about that. But when you reach a point where like one or two shots and the fight's over, by golly, that's as good as it gets, and the rest is on you.
Keith, fast forwarding to the present, what is the standard issue weapon for your agency and the standard issue ammunition in terms of handguns?
The standard issue weapon is a Glock 22 40 caliber handgun, and our issue ammunition is federal tactical bonded in the 165 grain bullet weight. We used the 155 briefly and found the 165 seemed to work better, and we've used that for ever since it came out in the 1993, we were like the first agency to start using the tactical bonded 165.
Now we're looking at about 1,140 feet per second with that.
Actually, when you talk about like 165 grains and 40 caliber, you could identify three loads. The old FBI spec Hydra shock, when we'd fire from a Glock, it would be like 940, 950. And then the full power, like a full power gold up, when you fired out of a Glock 22, and it would be like 1170 muzzle velocity. There's a medium power load that they started to load, and it's around 1050. And the load we have, our tactical bonded 165, we've had so much wonderful luck with. It books at 1,050 when we fire from a Glock 22. It's like 1,033, 1,028 from a Glock 22.
Now tell me why you believe you're having such good luck with that now.
Because that's as I say, it's I guess I would want to say it's a medium velocity 40 caliber 165. The 165 bullet for the rifling in most Glock semi-autos is about optimum for the rifling rate. It's accurate, and our people, as I say, our first responders who came on the job as a police officer, and they didn't have a gun background, and It's got that slightly attenuated recoil. It doesn't kick quite so hard as a full power 165 like some agencies use. And our average everyday person in a panic can pick it up and hit you through the middle of the chest with it.
You're thinking it's largely placement, but it's
yeah.
also the round is doing its job.
We're astonished. I've for years and years I've gone to autopsies to be there firsthand to see what the bullets look like when they were recovered from the bodies of homicidal attackers. And the federal 165 tactical bonded, you can shoot it through heavy clothing. It still expands. It'll be like 65, 66 caliber, no matter what you do to it. It'll expand just enough and no more. And it's easy to shoot, very accurate. And as I say, you can't plug it with heavy clothing, no matter what you shoot it through. And it's easy to shoot, and it's easy to place, and it does the job when it gets there.
Keith, let me ask you a hypothetical question. Tomorrow there is a rift in the time-space continuum, and you have a new chief law enforcement officer who says, fellas, carry whatever you want. Tell our listeners what you would carry and what you would load it with.
Well, if you're talking about personally, okay, and this is just for me or what I would mandate for a department.
Correct. Well, for you.
Just for me, I would say I have learned, this is, we're all products of our yesterdays and we all have our opinions. But as far as the commonly available 9mm 40, 45, I try to stay for defensive use. I try to pick ammunition that is not subsonic. When I say, it's the speed of sound at sea levels like 1,100 feet per second, well, I like to see it going that speed or faster. We can test it, and it's got to have adequate penetration, but for my part, I stay away from 45 ACP and 45 gap. And to make a short answer out of your question, I would pick a 40 caliber, and I would get a 155 grain hollow point or a 165 grain, either in the medium velocity or the full power, and that's what I would use in 40 caliber. If I were to use a 9mm, and those are very effective. In years past, we had super luck at different agencies, not just our own, with the 115 grain plus P plus. But the technology and the bullet manufacturers and the design engineers, they've taken the 124 Gold Dots and 124 Rangers and the 124 HSTs, and they do just as well as a 40. And the 40s, the better 40s, there's a lot of 40s that do just as well as a 45. The problem with, if I thought 45s worked good, believe me, I'd carry 2 or 3 of them. But the point is, with a 45, those guns are engineered, even today at the factory, they're engineered to be fired from a 5-inch barrel. And when you cut it back to a 4-inch or 4 1/4 inch or something like that, then you start to not get the expansion that they get fired from a 5-inch when they fire it into jello. So for me, optimally, the 40 caliber, that was designed from the ground up to shoot from a 4-inch barrel. And if you have one that's 3 3/4 or whatever, you still get the same performance. It's a more compact gun, generally holds more ammunition than the 45. You see agencies like the United States Border Patrol that use 155 grain 40 caliber, and if their guys place the shots, they win every time.
That's a 1,200 foot-second load?
Yes, it's 1,200 and a little bit more. I think their contract ammo is it's a little bit more. They get it from, I think they're using predominantly Winchester now, and what it amounts to is it's a 155 silver tip without the silver plating on it.
I've also seen very good effects with the standard silver tip 155 grain. Keith, in one of the shootings you and I discussed, you dropped a would-be cop killer with one shot and dumped him like a falling rock, and it turned out the hit was non-fatal. As I recall, it was a 115 grain plus B plus.
Right.
Jacketed hollow point at 1,300 foot seconds.
Yeah, it was the federal version.
BPLE. Tell our listeners about that and what the experience was.
Well, that was
like.
a warrant service, and we had poor luck, as I said previously, with the cycle reliability of of the 147s that we had in those days. And some of the units we were using 115 plus P plus because it had a stronger recoil effect on the slide, and the gun stayed in action, and that was the big thing. You need the gun to stay in action. But this was a warrant service, and when we we covered the front door, covered the back door. One of the parties inside that we had arrest warrants for bailed out of a window, ran across the street, and my partner and I chased after him. He turned and fired at us with a 9mm, and I returned fire because I was out front, and my partner was behind me, so he couldn't risk shooting because he'd hit me. But I fired 2 shots at the guy. One round hit the guy in the lower jaw and knocked him cold. And the guy went down, and I thought I'd hurt him fatally, and I thought, boy, I felt bad. And he went right down, boom, and I thought, oh boy, he's gone. And we walked up there, and we could hear him making a choking noise, and he was choking on his own blood. I had hit him in the jaw, shattered the jaw, and knocked him unconscious with that impact, with that really high velocity bullet. And we rolled him over, I got him over onto his stomach, and as to where he could breathe and clear his airway. And then we got an ambulance there and got him secured and sent him in, and he survived. And we took him in, and he got a prison sentence. But that was one of the things when you talk about, as I say, we're all a product of our yesterdays. When you ask me, would I rather have a 147 grain subsonic or a plus P plus or a plus P? I will opt for the plus P or the 357 Magnum or the 357 SIG just because it goes faster. And those little less than perfect impacts, like in the old days, one of our panicked officers pulling a 357 Magnum, hitting a guy on the wrist, and it would shatter the bones in his gun hand. Okay, no one died, but he went to jail. And that was just the velocity with adequate penetration. And, contrasting the 147 9mm against the 115 plus P plus, or the luck other agencies have had with the 124 plus Ps. It's just, I just have just a hardcore belief in my mindset that I would rather have something that's really going.
Keith, among the cognoscentes in officer survival, you are one of the go-to guys. How much of the advice that you give, the body of knowledge that you share with the rest of us, how much of that comes from your personal experiences, and how much comes from the collective research that you've been doing over these decades?
I if you don't mind me being, it probably sounds silly to you, but it chiefly to me has come from the research when I've talked to other men who have survived and prevailed in lethal force encounters. And I'll tell you why. Oftentimes when you're involved in a shooting incident, your mind will block out parts of that. And I have found over the years that oftentimes when an officer gets in a shooting incident, and to be truthful, like you, most policemen are lucky enough that they don't get any shootouts at all. They're able to use their weapon as a threat management tool. They may get right up to the last ragged razor's edge of a confrontation, and they're able to resolve it without shooting. And those who do shoot, maybe it's the only time in their 20 or 25 year career that they actually shoot someone. Okay. But when an officer or a citizen defensive shooter is involved in a shooting, there's enough of a, I don't want to say trauma because I know that it's trauma, but you'll blank things out. I know in your presentations and your LFI-1 course and some of your other training courses, you recommend to people that they don't make any statements initially right after they've been involved in a self-defense shooting, because they need some time to get away, to settle down and gather themselves. And all too often, I know with police officers, they'll internalize the wrong lessons. I think I did. I know early on when people would say, geez, how did you manage to whip that guy? I would say, well, by golly, we had a 357 Magnum and a really high-speed bullet, and that was it. And then it was gently pointed out to me by other researchers in the 30 years ago that no, it's something else, because we know other agencies that have the same equipment and ammo, and they're not doing as well as you. Well, that taught me right there that I'd internalized the wrong things. So I'm a little bit I always, when I listen to someone who's been in a gunfight, I try to take that into account, that I want to hope that he's had somebody who knows what they're doing and who's debriefed him and helped him to learn what he really learned, instead of internalizing the wrong thing. And I'm running you all the way around the barn, but like you're saying, like, what did I learn from my incidents? Actually, I didn't really learn as much as I should until I started to talk to other officers who prevailed in lethal force encounters, because when you step outside and listen to their story, then you think back to your experiences, and you start to learn the things that are so important to learn. And then we've been able here within our training, we've been able to from the tactical aspect, everybody, people get sidetracked on what sort of ammo to use. And beyond a certain point, that almost doesn't matter. I could almost make a case that if you just had full metal jacket ball ammo, you can still prevail. And people, like most people, fixate on the equipment because it's a tangible. You can rub your fingers all over it. You can chronograph the ammo. You can shoot it into a test medium. And geez, oh Pete, that's something you talk about. When we say mindset, they don't know what to say. And when you say tactics, they say, well, what do you mean? So I know from my part, if anything I've ever contribute to anyone like you folks or anybody who would ever care to listen in the classes that I've done, is that like we've boiled down simple learning points to teach people to look ahead and think ahead and control all of the variables that occur during a lethal force counter or a homicidal attack, so that they've got a handle on that, and they're able to do more than just try to get the biggest bullet or the fastest bullet.
Keith, one question always comes up. I talk to you, I talk to a lot of the other fellows I've debriefed too, because they've had to kill a lot of people in gunfights. That's what everybody focuses on and asks them about. And what I got again and again from those guys was, they talk about the men I killed. They never look at how many men I captured alive because I was able to intimidate them and keep them from trying to kill me or the other officers. Let's look at that. 38 years, okay, 5 gunfights, 5 men shot down. Did you ever even have time to count how many people in all those decades you were able to capture alive and give them another chance at life because you intimidated them?
I know for my part it was like 75 or 80%, and that's generally when you get police officers. That's generally what it runs, if not higher. If we can get the officers to look ahead and think ahead, and believe me, we're training them toward that angle to preset everything so that like when they approach a situation, they're in control, and they don't have to relinquish that control. You recall Jim Cirillo, the stakeout unit with the New York PD. Those guys, as best my memory serves, their 40-man unit dealt with some of the most hyper-violent armed robbers. They were Marxist-trained anti-America insurgents, believe it or not, and heroin junkies, and they confronted 252 armed people at spitting distance, or at best just across the room. And of those, they shot 52 of them. Now, when you do some quick math, and very nearly 80% of the people they had brought in alive, unharmed, in handcuffs, and stood them up in front of a judge. And I think that's astounding. You remember a police officer, even an armed citizen, you're not so much a gunfighter. The gun's not for shooting people, it's for threat management. And like too many training schools just teach you how to shoot the gun. And what we've tried to change, years ago, and as I see more trainers like yourself, especially you've always done it, to teach people that it's for threat management, and that so many times you'll be able to set yourself up and not shoot anybody. If we could teach people to be good at armed confrontations, and stress that, and get away from the idea of teaching them to be really good gunfighters. I think that's the idea.
Keith, can you address elements like distance and cover and how that plays into the ability to control one of these situations without bloodshed?
Well, you say that. That's some of the stuff that we've learned, and we've kind of distilled that amount of knowledge down. There are variables in any sort of a deadly encounter, like how well you shoot, how well your attacker can shoot, what's your mindset, what his mindset. When was the last time you practiced the weapon you use, the ambient light, things like that. And you can't control all these variables. And most people, they try to look ahead and think ahead, but all they can do is control the weapon and the ammo and the amount of practice they do. And we've worked to develop, develop ways to control the other variables. And I know that actually the way I explain it is like when you have the Army Corps of Engineers go out to control a river that's flooding, and they want to deal with a river that's out of control. Like the variables. The river's in motion all the time, and you can't wait out with a 5-gallon bucket and change the river's flow by changing the water. And when the Army Corps of Engineers goes out to deal with that sort of a situation, they don't look on it as a river. They look on it as a river bed. They know that if they control the river bed, then they control the river and all the variables that flow over it. And it's pretty much the same way that in a lethal force encounter. That's what's happening. And the way the underlying factors that control the variables in a shooting incident, we've learned, are distance and cover and time. Who controls the distance? Like, the FBI's law enforcement officers killed and assaulted, their status, their research years ago when they started that showed that officers were dying at like 3 and 4 and up to 7 yards. That was where most of the officers died. And the problem is in the old days, we assumed that was how you train people, and we taught all of our officers to learn to gunfight up close. We've gotten away from that. We're teaching them now to control distance before the fight, like, not get so close on a traffic stop, not get so close when you call somebody out. And in cover, whoever controls cover in a fight. And, the knowledge of like what's really cover and what's merely concealment. And, like when you approach something, are you within a step or so of a telephone pole or a tree or a U.S. Postal Service street corner mailbox or a trash dumpster? Are you controlling that? And then time. You can't really control time, but it's there, And when you're attacked by someone and they have the momentum and the initiative, then the time's working on their side. And what you need to do is take steps to violently rob them of the momentum and rob them of the time. And if you get in a good shot into their chest, and it changes their channel, and most of them will turn away, believe me, if you hit them hard enough. But the ones that don't, it'll slow them up for a second or 1.2 or 1.3 seconds. And that's time that you rob from your attacker. You violently taken it from him right when you need it the most and right when he can bear to lose it the least. And like if you get your first shot in, for example, then and he can't recover for like 3/4 of a second or 1 second or 1.2 seconds. How many follow-up rounds can you fire? How many better aim follow-up rounds can you fire in that time? Okay, and that's what we try to teach people to do. A handgun fight has a lot more in common with a fist fight than what it does a tactical nuclear strike. And too many people, they think they've got a handgun. It's like this mystical, magical talisman. And if they point it intersperse it between them and the bad guy, that it's something magical and it's going to take care of stuff. That's not how it goes. The operative part of the term gunfight isn't gun, it's fight. And like when you think of, like, as I said, a handgun fight's closer to being a fist fight. Think about a prize fighter. He may hope that his first punch knocks somebody cold, and he may be very happy if it does, but the point is he doesn't expect it. What he expects is his first punch is to set up his second punch and his third punch, and it's somewhere really quick, it's going to leave an opening for him that he can capitalize. And actually, I don't want to use that word. It'll leave an opening that against his adversary that he can exploit. And that's when the momentum shifts, and that's when one guy who was winning starts to lose, and the other guy who was losing starts to win. And they're in a fight, you know that, and your attacker knows that. And that's when the mindset shifts, and his fighting mindset is destroyed, and you start to prevail. You have to take a gunfight. You have to win it in increments. Like we're talking about handguns. That's why it's such a bad idea to use a handgun if you can get a shoulder gun. But if you're dealing with handguns, sometimes you've got to take your victory incrementally. Okay, and what we tell people is, like, when you hit people, don't expect them to turn into a pink mist. What do you expect out of your gunfire? We expect it to do 4 things. They all start with the letter D. And that's distract the guy's focus, or disrupt his plan, or disable his body, or destroy his will to fight. With your gunfire, your first shot, your second shot, if you've done something to distract his focus, you've disrupted his plan, and now he's got to stop, reorient, come up with a new plan. And I'll tell you what, that's tough to do when somebody's shooting at you. Okay, and then disable his body. I'm not saying you'll have to kill him, but if you wreck his hand, or you hit him in the chest and hit that big nerve plexus that controls his ability to lift his arm, things like that. And like when this happens, it destroys his fighting mindset, and that's when you start to really win.
Keith, I want to thank you for taking the time to share all this with our listeners. We really appreciate it. How long are you going to stay on the job before you retire?
Well, if I work here a couple more years, I'll actually have enough money to where I can actually walk away and live on that. But then, one of the bad things they say about police work is just when you finally reach a point where you understand what to do and how to do it and not make no mistakes, it's time to retire.
Well, with that in mind, is it safe to say that after you've retired, you will still be available to share lessons with the good guys?
Yes, that would be I'd find that really rewarding, and like if I could do something to make a positive difference for everyday people, that's what I'd like to do.
You already have, my brother, and I know you're going to do more.